Señorita Extravidada, Missing Young Women is a documentary that tells the haunting story of the more than 350 kidnapped, raped, and murdered young women of Juarez, Mexico from 1993 to the year 2000. It was estimated that more than 370 women were killed between 1993 and 2005 in Ciudad Juarez, a city in northern Mexico. The murdered women and girls received international attention primarily due to a perceived government inaction in preventing the violence and bringing perpetrators to justice. This film tells the haunting story of the more than 350 kidnapped, raped, and murdered young women of Juarez, Mexico. Visually poetic, yet unflinching in its gaze, this documentary follows an investigation with layers of cultural complicity that have allowed for the brutal murders of the women living alongside the U.S. border. In the midst of Juarez's international manufacturing boom and high-profile job market, there exists a murky history of grossly underreported human rights abuses and violence against women with very little justice for the victims' families. The climate of violence and impunity continues to grow, and the murders of women continue to this day. Relying on director Portillo, she comes to see the most reliable of sources being the testimonies of the families of the victims. Señorita Extravidada, or Missing Young Women, documents a 2-year search for the truth in the underbelly of the new global economy of Juarez, Mexico. What we know as an observer of this film is that someone is killing the young women of Juarez, Mexico, one of the world's largest bordered cities. Since 1993, more than 270 young women have been raped and murdered in a chillingly consistent and brazen manner. Police and politicians blame the women for being prostitutes, though many were workers at the local manufacturing plants and students attending the 4 local universities in the town. This film details outlandish leads like Satan-worshipping cults, gang ties to non-existent prostitution rings, and foreign nationals who pay bounties on the heads of women, all while relatives of the women demand justice and are largely ignored by authorities. Most disturbingly, evidence of police complicity in raping women who had tried to come forward with evidence on this case. No officers were convicted, and those cases remained uninvestigated as the killings continued. This shocking crime wave is laid bare in this film, which takes you into the chaos of a booming border town to ask questions the authorities would rather we ignore. As bodies begin to appear in the desert around Juarez in 1993, human remains continue to turn up to this day. These remains of young women who were brutally raped and murdered. Despite the number of victims and the audacity of the killers, the authorities remain largely ineffective in capturing the murderers of these women. After callously and incorrectly writing off the murderers to a wayward lifestyle of supposed prostitutes, they then tampered or destroyed evidence on one case then another. Police captured suspects whose guilt became more and more implausible in the face of continuing murders and were quick to call cases closed. From the 1990s to the year 2000, in the making of this film, there were over 400 cases of femicide. In 2019, it jumped to 943. Protecting women against gender-based violence is a human rights violation often overlooked globally. In Latin America, the laws exist to protect women, but those laws are often not uniformly implemented, and there is often a lack of political will to fully comply with the law and international obligations, which is what happened in Juarez from 1993 to 2000, as evident when the sister of one of the girls featured in the film was kidnapped and murdered as production on this film wrapped. Common themes found throughout the film were victim blaming. bad policing, and the dehumanization of women. Politicians and police from the beginning of the slaying in Juarez blamed the women and described them as undesirable sex workers who asked for it, as no reasonable woman would be out at night, ignoring the fact that some of the killers were bus drivers in charge of transporting women from school and work. A special unit was set up in 1996 for the purpose of catching and trying these murderers, but poor training, lack of funds and resources ensured these investigations would not be taken seriously and no real answers for the victims' families given. Because these women did not come from privileged backgrounds and were from poor rural parts of Mexico, they were easy to write off by society as prostitutes, when in reality they represented women of all avenues of life in parts of Mexico. A question of had these women not been poor women of color, would police have taken these murders more seriously? A study was conducted in 2008 on the femicide database from 1993 to the year 2007 at the Colegio de la Frontera Norte, which documented incidents of femicide that occurred in Ciudad Juarez from 1993 to 2007. Of the various different kinds of murders that were analyzed, the study found two common patterns in the data which were classified as intimate femicide, meaning the victim knew her killer. It could have been an ex-boyfriend, family member, or someone they worked or went to school with. The second was systematic sexual femicide, meaning that the victim did not know their murderer and were killed indiscriminately by these people. Today, drug cartels operate in Juarez, which has resulted in high levels of violence against the local population, including women and girls. Misogyny is a common trait amongst gang activity. According to a study conducted in 2008, 9.1% of the murders of women were attributed to organized crime and drug trafficking activities. For the last dozen years, a local activist group in Ciudad Juarez have heard shocking reports of women killing known in Mexico as femicidio. About one in every three of the 370 women murdered since 1993 have been young teens who have died as a result of grotesque sexualized torture. According to non-government organizations, and about 30 women have been murdered annually in Juarez's metropolitan area of more than 2 million people.